Thank you for the very nice introduction, and which is actually better than my speech. By the way, thank you very much. My name is Ambassador Dino Djalal from Washington, D.C. I arrived about 9 months ago, and I like the introduction, actually. It reminds me of a Jay Leno setup, you know. Here's our next speaker, and it comes out, and which is good for me. You know why? Because I've been here for 9 months, and the hardest part of my job is not telling people about Indonesia, it's convincing people in America, or especially in Washington, D.C., that I am actually the ambassador. You know, I have as one of the perks being ambassador, you get a driver, right? So I have this guy who's very distinguished looking. He dresses up like a James Bond, very good looking, tall, handsome man. Drives me everywhere, and every time I have something in my house at a reception, he would stand next to me because you know, his job would be to take away the car keys of the incoming guests. And there are times when there would be senators or congressmen or CEO who would come, pull into my driveway and stop right in front of me. And he gets out of the car, gives me the car keys, and greets my driver. So it's not good for my ego, really. So. But by the way, David, thank you for you were announced that you got a job at Voice of America, so thank you very much. And I think it's a good advertisement that people who graduate from Clinton School of Public Service do get jobs right after they got. That was a joke, by the way. Look, I'm here to talk about my country, Indonesia. I'm very pleased to be. I've never been to Arkansas. I hear so much about Little Rock. And you know, for so many years, and I've always wanted to visit Little Rock, and I've always wanted to visit the Clinton Presidential Library, and I had the chance to do that just now. It's very, very impressive, and I'm going to put it out on my Twitter today about both the good people of Little Rock and also about the Presidential Library. So thank you for inviting me and for showing me the spirit of your city. Let me say a few things about Indonesia. Indonesia, just first basic facts about my country. Indonesia is the fourth largest country in the world. We have about 240 million people and growing. We are number 4 in the world. We are the largest population in Southeast Asia. We are the 3rd largest democracy in the world after India and United States and then Indonesia. We are the largest economy in Southeast Asia. We are number 16th in terms of GDP, and we aim to be in the top 10 of the world economy in the next 2 decades or so. We have the largest Muslim population in the whole world. There are more Muslims in Indonesia than in the entire Middle East, right? Which makes us very strategic. And these are not just, that's not the only attributes. Indonesia's Muslims are moderate Muslims. You'll be surprised to find that Indonesia is the only Muslim majority country in the world which celebrates Christmas and Easter as national holidays. Right? We also celebrate Hindus as national holidays and Buddhists as national holidays. And I don't complain because more holidays the better for me as public servants, right? And the spirit of tolerance has been very much part of our nationalism and our nationhood. Indonesia also is an environmental superpower, we like to call ourselves, because 30% of the world's tropical rainforests come from Indonesia, which means that a lot of the oxygen that we breathe is produced by Indonesian trees. So we've been giving you free environmental service for a long time. Indonesia also is a very diverse country. We are about 270 ethnic groups, a lot of dialects, a lot of races, brown skin like me, Chinese, black, and so on and so on. So we are a very diverse country religiously, ethnically, racially, And we also have 17,000 islands, none of which are for sale. We have quite a lot. We are the largest archipelago in the world, and we have also the most volcanoes in the world. The sort of sad part about Indonesia is that we are a country most prone to natural disasters. We have more earthquakes and natural disasters than any other country in the world, small, medium, and large one. The most well-known one is the tsunami that hit Indonesia in 2004, and which killed about 200,000 people in just half hour. Right? So, but that has been built into our national psyche, this being part of being prone to natural disaster. So that's about Indonesia. It's an extraordinary country. In fact, Colin Powell, when he was Secretary of State, said that Indonesia is one of the most misunderstood country in the world. And when President Barack Obama came to Indonesia last November, he also said that among all the major powers, Indonesia is one country that Americans knew least about. And I think I agree with him, and which is why I'm here to talk to you about my country. Indonesia is, beyond all that, one of the most interesting, if not most successful, transformation stories in the last decade or so. Now, you saw a lot of changes in the global political map around the world. A lot of revolutions, a lot of regime change, democracies rose up, democracies fell down, and so on and so on. But Indonesia is one case where things did not go so well for a while, but in the end, it turned out okay. You know, when we had authoritarian government for so long since independence, we became independent in 1945, and then 1998, we became a democracy. Now, when we started that, everything went wrong. We had separatism. The economy could not grow beyond 1%. You know, in fact, it went down to minus 13%. We had ethnic conflicts. We had religious conflicts. We had terrorism. We had political instability. We had constitutional crisis. We had the problem in East Timor. Everything that we had seemed to go wrong. In fact, there was a saying that Indonesia was the sick man of Asia at the time, and Thomas Friedman, my favorite columnist, said that Indonesia was just a messy state, just like Russia was a messy state. It was too big to fail and too messy to work, something like that. Right? So for several years, we were just on a limbo. We were just searching for a way to get back on our feet. And I'm glad to say that after all these years, Indonesia now seems to have found that rhythm, seems to have found what many democracies are still searching, right? Again, if you ask me how and what happened, no one really has the right clear-cut answer, but there are several things that we have found to be workable in Indonesia's transformational experience. First, we have found a way to connect democracy with development. Right? Now, this is very important because when I was studying in university, the debate was, you can't have both. You know, you can't have both. Third world countries, you can't have both. You either have only democracy, choose freedom, but at the expense of economic development, or you choose development, growth, but not freedom. You can't have both, they said, right? And this is why there were a lot of authoritarian governments in Asia at the time, including in my country, in Latin America, you know, on the presumption that stability and growth requires you decline, you suppress democracy and freedom, right? But happily, we did not go through that. We did not have to choose. In fact, our experience showed that you can have both democracy. We've been having 3 periodic elections every 5 years, and each time our country becomes stronger, our democracy becomes more stable. And we've had remarkable economic growth, right? In the last 6 years or so, our economy has been growing around 5 to 6%. At the height of the global financial crisis, our economy grew by 4.5%, the third highest among the G20 economies after China and India. So we prove you can have political development and economic development. And this is one thing that we've been saying to every country that is undergoing democratic transitions. You don't have to choose anymore. Secondly, we also have found, happily, that democracy and Islam and modernity go hand in hand beautifully in Indonesia, right? Now, this is important because even within Indonesia, they say, no, you open up democracy, the Islamic parties will take over. They will rise up. I mean, you have more Muslims in the entire Middle East, And in fact, Islamic parties did proliferate, right? But what happened was the Islamic parties in Indonesia opted to support democracy. Why? Because under the old regime, they were suppressed. And under the new democracy, they were free. And they knew from our elections, in the 3 elections, that you can't win votes in Indonesia just by waving the Islamic flag. You can't win votes that way. You get the most collection of them, 15%, right? What does that mean? For Islamic party to gain power, they must be pragmatic, they must show pluralism, they must be tolerant, they must embrace the Christians, they must embrace a larger platform than Islamic platform. That turns them into a supporter of democracy and nationalism. And this is something that we have found happily because I'll tell you why this is important. My eyes on the Middle East opened during my visit in 2005 when I traveled with my president there. And I realized that there are few countries in the world that has the 3-in-1, right? The 3-in-1 is democracy, Islam, and modernity. In the Middle East, you ask what countries are Islamic. Everyone was Islamic. Jordan, Syria, Palestine, Emirates, Qatar, everyone was Islamic. But then you ask how many countries are Islamic and modern. You cut the number by half or even less, right? Because probably Qatar definitely gets in there. The Emiratis get in there, right? But the number gets fewer as you ask which are countries which are Islamic and modern. But if you ask which countries are Islamic, modern, and democratic, goes down dramatically. It's so difficult in the Middle East. Yet in Indonesia, we achieve all these 3, becoming democratic, being Islamic, being modern, plus what Secretary Hillary Clinton says, women's rights, all in one package, effortlessly. No bloodshed, no soul-searching debates in parliament, no politicians fighting among each other. We achieved it effortlessly. And this is our message to the Islamic world, that look, it's not as difficult as you think. Look at us. We are very religious. Dewi, as you see, is religious, but she's also very democratic. My mom is also very religious. There's increasing religiosity in Indonesia, but it also doesn't. It also produces. It doesn't prevent them from becoming modern and nationalistic and democratic. In fact, one special thing about Indonesia's Islam is that there's greater confidence, which is different than before. Before, we used to think Islam gravitates in the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, because that's where Mecca is. That's where we pray all the time, right? But now Indonesia's Muslims say, no, we pray to Mecca still, but the gravity of the Islamic world need not be the Middle East. It can be in Indonesia. It can be in Malaysia, right? It can be in Turkey. It does not have to be in the Middle East. Why? Because Indonesians are not afraid of the 21st century. Because Indonesians are not afraid of globalization. Indonesians are not afraid to expose themselves to Western influence. In fact, we love mix and matching with Oriental culture, with African, with Latin American, with Westerns, right? We are showing to the world that Islamic Renaissance in Indonesia is alive, and that we are forward-looking and not backward-looking. And because of that, Indonesian Muslims are confident and should also be the gravity of the Islamic world. The third lesson we have learned about our democratic transition is the fact that we have been able to marry with stability. Now, you know, this is also very important because if you look at democratic transitions around the world, there are only three ways to go. You become more solid, or you stagnate, or you decay and crumble. Majority of democratic transitions are in the last two. They either just don't go anywhere, you know, they just stagnate. You see this in Pakistan, so to speak. Maybe in Thailand, you know, I'm sorry if there are Pakistanis or Thailand's, but around the world, you see most of them are stagnating or decaying, and very few are actually becoming stronger, right? Now, Indonesia, again, I don't know why that is, but we have been able to marry democracy and stability, right? We didn't have this. Between 1998 and 2002, we had one president every year, right? But now we have regular elections, and the present government is supposed to last until 2014, and then hopefully the next governments also will continue their terms, their 5-year terms forward, right? So that is something very expensive because, again, to relate to what they used to say, they said, you don't want democracy because if you have democracy, you'll have instability. They used to say that to us, and they said this in many other democracies as well. They said, you don't want democracy because you have democracy, the country will break apart, right? You don't want that, right? They said other things like, you don't want democracy because if you have democracy, you lose national identity, and so on, right? But our experience has shown that the more we embrace democracy, the more we prove these theories to be wrong, right? These presumptions to be wrong. The more we have democracy, the more we have stability, the more we have national unity, the more we have development, and the more we have tolerance within Indonesia. So this is why I say Indonesia's democratic transitions have been remarkable, right? There are several lessons, if you ask me why this is so, without attempting to come up with a particular dictums of democratic transitions. One is, even though Indonesia is such a complex nation with so many different religions and ethnic groups, it really takes the right amount of governance to set things right. You know, you get the right policy, you get the right elections, you get the right leaderships, you make the right investments, you make the right priorities, and you invest in your people, things will begin to fall into place, you know. I think this is something that is true for most other countries as well, right? But just the right amount of the right governance and policies can set countries in the right direction. Secondly, is the ability to evolve the right kind of nationalism, right? You know, nationalism is very important, but there are different kinds of nationalism. There is an open nationalism, there's the narrow nationalism. There is a moderate nationalism, there's an arrogant nationalism, right? There's an outward-looking nationalism, there's an inward-looking nationalism. We have been able, I believe, in the last 10 years, evolve an open, moderate, plural, tolerant, and creative nationalism. And what is most important, we have been able to connect our nationalism with internationalism, which means we believe that we can be proud Indonesians, but we can only succeed if we get to engage the world in the right way. In other words, we believe passionately that our international engagement make us stronger, better, and safer, right? So this ability to marry nationalism and internationalism has been critical to us. And I say this because there are politicians in Indonesia that has tried, in order to win votes or other things, to pit our nationalism against internationalism, saying that Indonesia is great and the world is against us, we must fight the world, right? And that doesn't work. If somebody led Indonesia with that kind of mindset, Indonesia would not be where we are today, right? So this ability to evolve this type of nationalism, open, plural, moderate, and tolerant, and how we are able to keep it is going to be very critical to Indonesia's national growth in the following decades. It is also important that we focus on building the system in the last decade, right? If you ask me what is the most important thing, it is the system. Now, why is that? I think maybe you in America tend to take it for granted because your system has been working quite well, right? But in my country and in many other countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and the Middle East, the system is defined by the leader, the person. You see this in Libya and with Gaddafi, right? You see this in many other countries in the Middle East. You see this in Egypt, where the system was basically Mubarak for 30 years. In Indonesia, the system was basically Suharto for 30 years, right? And that's the wrong way to go, not in the 21st century, right? The 20th century may be a system, an age of great men, Nehru, Sukarno, Gandhi, Nkrumah, Nasser, but the 21st century must be the age of good systems, if not great systems. And what was special in Indonesia in the last 10 years or so, we told the leaders, you're not important. You may be good looking, you may be popular, you may be a great orator, but we don't focus on you. We focus on building the Constitution, we focus on building the rule of law, we focus on fighting corruptions, we focus on making sure that the legal mafias are eradicated. We make sure that money politics is out of the picture. We make sure that extremism and radicalism is out or is on the defensive, right? But the more you focus on these checks and balances and institutional developments, the stronger we become as a democracy and as a nation. And this is what we would say to Egypt. This is what we would say to countries that are undergoing democratic transitions in other places, that focus on the system and do away with anything that focus on the persona of the individual. Because once the individual goes, the system crumbles with it. But if you have a strong system, whenever that individual goes, the system is still there, as you experience in America. So these are the things that I want to share with you about Indonesia's democracy. Just two final points. I think the most important change that we see in Indonesia in the last decade is the mindset change. It's quite remarkable because you look at me now. I've been in foreign service for about 25 years, and my job used to be to defend dictatorship, to defend the Suharto government, and I believed it, because that was my job and that was my upbringing. I did not know, I was too afraid of the alternative, of the uncertainty. So my job in the first years of my diplomatic career was to defend authoritarianism to say that democracy was not right for Indonesia. And I did not say it because I was instructed to do so, but I said it because we were led to believe that in our schools, in our job, in our office. Now, I wholly believe that Indonesia cannot be anything else but a democracy. At this age, at this age, I've been believing this in the last 10 years. I believe that Indonesia's democracy has achieved a point of no return, that it is irreversible. And I say with full confidence, and you ask any Indonesians that will agree, there's no prospect of military coup in Indonesia. No prospect. Unlike Thailand, for example, which had military coup, right? Because, first, the military knows it may be able to take power one day, but they'll be out a week after, right? Our democracy is just too strong, right? Just like in America, there's no prospect of a military coup, right? So this can only happen because there's a mindset change across Indonesia, across economic spectrums, across ethnic barriers, that believe that democracy is very much part of what it means to be Indonesia today, right? So this mindset change, I think, is the most remarkable transformation in Indonesia. No worries about the fact that we're now in an emerging economy, that our numbers are up, and so on and so on. That's number two. The number one change is the mindset change. But secondly, there's still a battle for the soul of Indonesia. Again, I may sound contradictory, but that is the reality. And I think this is also happening in America. This is happening in Europe. This is happening in Latin America. There's always a battle for the soul of a nation between those who want to bring the country forward and those who are reminiscent on the past. There's a battle between those who are open-minded. There are those against those who are less open-minded. There's a battle for the soul of Indonesia between those who are moderate and tolerant versus those who are not so moderate and tolerant. There's a battle for the soul of Indonesia between those who still long for authoritarian past, and we do still have politicians who believe in the authoritarian days, against those who genuinely believe in democracy and human rights and openness. And this battle will continue. And it is a battle for the soul that will mark Indonesia's politics in the next decades to come, right? But I'm quite optimistic because now in Indonesia we see the growth of a new phenomenon, which is the growth of a passionate youth, millions of them. We are the number 2 countries in terms of Facebook users. I don't know if you know that. In the whole world, we're number 2 in terms of Facebook. We're number 3 for Twitter, right? So our youth just love to get connected, and the more they get connected, the more open-minded they become, and the more they see their nationalism in the context of internationalism, right? And these are the new phenomenon in Indonesian society and Indonesian politics. And as you see what is happening in the Middle East now, you see something interesting. In the 20th century when I went to university, they talk about class consciousness. Karl Marx talked about that, right? I think what you see now is a generational consciousness. Young people in Indonesia identifying themselves with young people in China, in Vietnam, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America. And not only identifying emotionally, they can connect. They can connect, they can talk, they can email back and forth, they can post things on YouTube, they get exposed to the same things. And I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg of how this is actually going to affect not just youth affairs, but international relations in general. So I'll stop there and be happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Let's, we'll take questions. Let's raise your hand, and we'll start with the former governor who knows Indonesia very well. This is Governor Jim Guy Tucker. There's the microphone behind you.
How you doing, Governor? Very nice to see you. Thank you for coming.
And this is Mrs. Tucker. This is Betty Tucker, the former First Lady of Arkansas.
Thank you for coming, Mrs. Tucker.
Terima kasih and
Thank you.
Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi. Terima kasih banyak.
Indonesia's motto, you referred to without telling us its name or its history, Pancasila. Could you say just a word about that for those here today?
Yes, thank you very much. Indonesia's motto is Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which means out of many, one. And this is very much similar to America's E pluribus unum. And this is the best way by which we can become a united nation, because in Indonesia, about 50% of the ethnic group are Javanese from the island of Java. It would be more or less like Russia in the days of the Soviet Union. They were quite dominant in terms of numbers. But if we were to adopt the Javanese language as a national language, then Indonesia would have a different weight, because it would feel as if the majority would control everything. So we pick as our national language the language that belongs to the minority, which is Malay, which is what we say in Indonesia, Bahasa Indonesia. And by doing that, we create a nationhood whereby we send a lesson to every Indonesian that Indonesia belongs to everybody and belongs to every ethnic group, and everybody is treated as equal. Indonesia, despite being the largest Muslim population in the world, is not an Islamic state. And there is also a pragmatic choice, Governor, because if Indonesia were to become an Islamic state, then there's only half of the territory to the west, from middle to the west. But the territory from the middle to the east is Christian. So even though 85 to 90% are Muslims, territorial-wise, it's quite even out, you know. And this is why, from day one, we chose not to be an Islamic state. We chose to be a state where there is full religious freedom in Indonesia. Yeah. So in that sense, Indonesia and America are quite similar. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, right here.
By the way, I'm honored that you came, sir. Thank you very much. I'll tell my mom, hey, the former governor came to my talk.
That's a good.
Thank you for being here today. Could I ask you to step back into the past? The policy of transmigre, was that successful?
The policy of?
Transmigre,
Yeah.
What is the legacy of that for you today?
Yeah, I think that is no longer a national priority now. We had a policy whereby, because Java was so densely populated, we had 100 million people in Java. So 50% of the whole population live in one island alone out of the 17,000 islands. So we tried to give incentives for farmers in Java to go to outer islands to develop land and farms. But to be honest, it didn't work very well, especially because now we have what is called decentralization, which means now every leader in Indonesia, every governor, every region, every mayor is directly elected by the people. In the past, it wasn't. But because of this, they can handle their own affairs unlike before, right? So it's quite difficult to conduct transmigration in that kind of decentralized environment. So what we have now is we're building what we call 6 growth development areas throughout Indonesia. And this means that we designate certain spots in Indonesia which will become the center of economic growth for the nation. Before, most of the growth centered around Java, but now we want to even it out. But we want to even it out by local resources rather than transporting people from Java to the other provinces. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sir, you have a question back here.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for coming. 2 questions, or maybe it's 1 question with 2 parts, but they're different. Which country did you pattern served as a primary pattern for the development of your Constitution, if you used a pattern specifically. And I'm curious as to what the Indonesian, the biggest concern Indonesia has about America in terms of worry, concern, what's bothersome about America that Indonesia feels.
Okay.
And we won't tell anybody what you said.
Okay. Can you lock the windows and the... All right. Thank you for your good questions. First, the laws we adopt from the Dutch, because we were colonized by the Dutch for several hundred years. So our laws still mirrored or adopted from the Dutch. But the Constitution from the memoirs of our president, President Sukarno, it was inspired by the Declaration of Independence, of American Declaration of Independence, and also the French Revolution, right? The American Declaration of Independence actually was quite inspiration to many revolutions around the world, including Indonesia, and many other things that became part of our nationhood, elections, republicanism, political parties, the concept of president, concept of parliament, rule of law, all these things were things that we adopted from Western political concepts, and we indigenized it to become a part of Indonesian political system. What do Indonesians want from America? The most important, I think, is education, right? And I tell you why. I have one statistic that tells the whole story. 20 years ago, there were 14,000 Indonesian students studying in America and 0 in China. So 14,000 and 0. Now, there are more Indonesians studying in China than in America. Yeah, you figure. I don't understand it. In China now, there's 8,500, and in the US, it's declined from 14,000 to 7,500. And this is despite the fact that if you ask any Indonesian parent where do they want to send their kids to go to school, the answer predominantly would be Australia and Indonesia, right? Australia 21%, Australia and America. Australia 21%, America 20%. And every day in Indonesia, people are bombarded with images about America in the channel, because we have cable channels, right? Your Hollywood movies, your sitcoms, your icons, although I wish that America would export more Oprah and less Paris Hilton, but that's a different story. But this is my mission, to reverse this, right? To reverse this, because I think the best way for America to invest in the future of other countries and to invest in peace in the world, and also to invest in America's future, is by making sure that there are more international students studying in America. And I hope this is something that we can achieve together. I certainly hope there'll be more Dewis who will study in Little Rock, Arkansas, and in other places. But by far, I think the most pressing challenge would be education. But the second thing, and this is a new thing in our relationship, is how Indonesia and America can work together to advance multiculturalism and tolerance, because I think this is the new diplomatic space that remains open. It's very new. We are very proud of it internally, and America also, but how do we cooperate worldwide to make sure that multiculturalism will be the new global politically correct theme of our generation, and there's a lot of things that we can do together. By the way, my embassy is very proud to be planning a very interesting concert in Washington, D.C. on July 9th. We are planning to organize a musical orchestra where we combine Christian gospel music, Islamic music, and then Jewish music. I don't know how it will sound, but it's going to be the first time it will be attempted, and it's one of the things that new areas that we can work together. And my president has also said that the 21st century can be very different than any previous centuries, because this is a century where we can probably achieve confluence among the Abrahamic religions, because there has never been a time before that the religions of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity achieve a more or less permanent state of confluence and harmony. And this is probably the best chance that we can probably achieve that in the 21st century, right? And this is how Indonesia and America can work together to achieve this.
Got a question from one of our graduates, former graduates, longtime graduate.
How you doing, Mr. Ambassador? My name is James Mitchell. I'm a graduate of the Clinton School. I was wondering if you think that fundamentalist organizations such as Jamaat al-Islamiyah can be convinced to participate in democracies like Indonesia?
Can be what, sorry?
Can be convinced to participate in democracy instead of using terrorism? And if so, how do you think that can be done?
I think, to be honest, there's a yes and no answer to that. He's asking about, there's a group, Jamaat Islamiyah, which is a very radical and extremist groups that has been conducting terrorist attacks in Indonesia. I think there's very little, there are two things. Of the terrorist groups that we have apprehended in Indonesia, we've pursued what is called de-radicalization program. So we sent them our Islamic clerics to debate them in their jail cell, right? To ask them, why do you kill people, right? And they say, well, because the blood of Christians are halal, for example, or because blah, 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 because this is the verse in the Quran that says this, right? And because if we do this, then we commit suicide bomb, there'll be 36 angels waiting for us at the gate of heaven, and so on and so on. And we've been having a program where we have Islamic clerics beat each of these arguments one by one, verse by verse, right? Because, to be honest, I don't know which verse, right? But these guys do, and they spend a lot of time with these guys in jail to do so. And to some degree, it has worked well. Not 100%, right? But maybe 60 or 70% it has worked well. But as an organization, I think realistically, it's going to be very difficult for them to accept the larger religious respect and freedom that we embrace in Indonesia, because they're just too ideological, right? But this is also why, for us, we believe the best way to beat terrorism is to kill their ideology, and the best way to kill their ideology is to make sure that the moderates in Indonesia are empowered. And the problem, this is not just in Indonesia, in other places as well, the moderates can lose their militancy. You know what I mean by this? At the first bomb, they go angry, and they say, the extremists are wrong, the radicals are wrong, and so on and so on. But after the second, third, fourth, fifth, and 10th bomb, their loudness becomes decreased, and because they can't be loud all the time, right? And this is what we try to convince the moderates. That's to say that, look, you cannot lose your militancy in the sense of your passion in defending your tolerance and moderation. Because once you lose that passion, once you decline in your voice, then the radicals and the extremists will gain the microphone, right? So the key to fight terrorism, kill their ideology, and make sure that moderates never decline in their militancy, in their passion, in pushing back at the radicals and at the extremists. Yeah.
One more question, Ryan in the back.
Is there anything being done about the massive gap between the rich and poor, or is that just assumed to be remedied by the growing economy?
It's a very good question. Before this job, I serve as the presidential spokesman. I work as a spokesman for the president. And I know one of the key things that we lose sleep over all the time is how do we make sure that growth does not lead to inequity? In fact, how do we connect growth with equity? Because what we read into the future is that we're going to see a world of plenty, around the world. The world's GDP, the world's trade, the world's FDI, foreign direct investment, is just exploding phenomenally. But it's also going to be a world of scarcity and inequity, right? So how do you connect or balance out a world of plenty with a world of scarcity and inequality? It's a tough question. And for us, the answer is government must intervene, right? I don't know how popular that is to say here in this country, but in Indonesia, government must set policies that favor the poor. Government must set policy that prioritize areas that are marginalized, that make sure that the largest amount of budget are allocated to health and education and not to for military spending. Right? So that is why in Indonesia the government, I wouldn't say intervention, but government role and government partnership with the private sector and civil society is extremely important to ensure that we not only get a world of plenty, but we also can minimize a world of scarcity and inequity.